Hello, everybody. Welcome to World History. Today we're continuing with the French Revolution and talking about the end of the old regime and the beginning of a new constitutional monarchy. Or was it? We'll be talking about the many governments that end up taking over France in the 1790s. Remember that the key date that we were talking about before is 1789, and we're going to continue with that. I've just been continuing to read about the French Revolution, and I'm just remembering how complicated it really is. So hopefully, with the explanation that I'll give you guys today, it'll be a lot easier to understand, because I know just reading it in the book and watching videos and all that, a lot of the information and the names for who's in charge at the moment, it changes quite a lot. So hopefully I can do something to help you understand what's going on. So we're going to start once again 1789. That's our key date. We're talking about the meeting of the Estates General. If you remember from last time, the king had called the Estates General, all three estates, to come meet in Paris to discuss how to deal with the financial crisis that France was in. How do we actually solve this problem? Well, each estate had their own ideas about how to solve things, but of course, the first and second estates, that being the clergy and the nobles, were pretty much locked in with what they believed to do. And the third estate, which represented the vast majority of people, 97 to 98% of people were in the third estate, they only had one vote. So you can imagine that this meant, the top 2% or 3% of people voted together, and then you have the third estate on its own. So basically, the third estate realizes how unfair this all is and decide to have their meeting without the other two estates. And because they want to have their meeting, the king actually locked them out of the meeting hall where the Estates General is actually taking place. So they said, okay, we'll go down the street. They end up meeting in a tennis court, and they take what is known today as the Tennis Court Oath. That's where the representatives of the Third Estate declared that they would not adjourn until they wrote a constitution, and they called themselves the National Assembly. The National Assembly is only made up of the Third Estate, and they decide to rebel against the other two estates, and that they're going to write a constitution, and that they want France to enact it as their official policy. Alright, so the National Assembly ends up taking over the country. They abolished the remnants of feudalism that had existed before. They repealed the tithe and canceled all feudal dues. Remember that the tithe was something that wasn't optional. You had to pay 10% of your income and your possessions to the church every year. That was the first estate. So basically, the National Assembly says, no more of that. We'll make it an optional thing. It's not something where they have to come and take it. They also did away with special privileges of the first and second estates, and they created what is known as the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. And we'll get there. So basically, the National Assembly has basically taken over the country at this point. Because remember, it is made up of 97% of the population. And the country is in a very restless mood right now. So revolution is definitely in the air. And the king is not too pleased about this kind of uprising that has taken place. So he's freaked out by the National Assembly and what they've started to enact among the populace. And so he tries to bring troops to Paris to kind of, ease this revolution before it gets too crazy. However, by bringing the troops, he actually kind of makes this happen in the first place. The commoners are afraid that he'll take down the National Assembly by force. So on July 14th, 1789, the people of Paris captured the prison fortress known as the Bastille because they knew it had weapons. So basically, even to this day, July 14th is seen as kind of the Independence Day of France. It's known as Bastille Day over there, and it's because it's the day where the French citizens kind of rose up and attacked the Bastille and basically said, we're not going to take this system anymore. The old regime, as it's now called, with the estate system, is basically done at this point. The third estate has kind of risen up and is trying to take over the country and have it be a more representative democracy, something similar to what had happened in the United States with the American Revolution and how they set up their own government. This was kind of the idea that they were going to create their own constitution, have their own legislature, and have the king around, but he will no longer be the absolute ruler. So that happens on July 14th, 1789. There is a great fear that sweeps France, and many in the countryside raid the houses of the nobility and clergy. You know, the revolutionary fervor among the people who had been so poor for so long really reaches a boiling point, to where a lot of the average French people, even out in the countryside who aren't near the big cities, are starting to rebel against the people who owned the fanciest houses and, you know, had lived the lives of the privileged. So basically, the story of the Bastille is really the beginning of the revolution as we know it. So the revolution overthrows the monarchy. This is the next section in the book. So basically, the National Assembly writes the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, or if you want to call it something funnier, the Romac. It's a foundational document outlining their most important beliefs. Before they create this new constitution, they're going to have their Declaration of Rights, of the rights of man, of the rights of humans. So basically, like, this is similar to their Declaration of Independence, as it were. So the ideas that go into this are very high-minded and very much influenced by the Enlightenment. So things like all men are created equal. There should be freedom of speech, religion, and the press. The right to representation in government, and the right to resist oppression. There's the right to personal liberty. And then the three big things that were talked about are liberty, equality, and fraternity. So liberty, you have the rights to do what you want as long as you aren't infringing on the rights of others. Equality, everyone should be treated equally. And then fraternity, which is a fancy word for brotherhood, that, you know, that we are all in this thing called life together. Yeah, so, and all of these things are put out there except, well, you know, it's the rights of man and citizen. A lot of women said, hey, where's our equal rights? And the people writing it said, oh, don't worry about that. So, sorry, ladies, the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen did not include women's rights just yet. That will come a little bit later. But so what's interesting is the fact that they write things like all men are created equal, but then still believe in, legal representation for the sexes being different. It's a different time period, of course. And, you know, the women's suffrage movement will happen about 120 years or so after this. I think it happens a little bit earlier in France. But have to remember about the time period as well. The Constitution of 1791. So now they've been in power now for 2 years. Remember, 1789 was our key year. This is the Constitution of 1791, just a little bit later. So the king is still around, but he no longer has the powers that he used to. They now have set up a constitutional monarchy, sort of like what the British have, where technically, you know, you have a monarch, but they don't have absolute power anymore. The power is really in the legislature. So what the United States has Congress, other countries have a parliament. This is really what's going to wield the most power, but we will still have a monarchy on top of it. And it sets up what's now known as the Legislative Assembly. And only wealthy men can vote for that. Once again, you know, they say, you know, equal rights for everybody, but, you know, only the wealthiest men can end up voting for it. So, yeah, you practice what you preach. What was Louis XVI's response? He agreed with it publicly, but privately was encouraging the nobles to ask other monarchs to retake France. He was very scared of the revolution and the fact that a lot of his powers were taken away, and that the old regime, which had existed for hundreds of years at this point, had been basically taken out in just a year. So he said, yes, well, I'll agree to the new constitution. I'll be like constitutional monarch. That's fine. But meanwhile, a lot of the people in the second and even first estates who had run away from France in the middle of kind of the revolutionary violence that had gone on, they were called émigrés, and they were called émigrés, yeah. And so they were basically the people who had left France and were living in other countries. They had gone to other countries that still had kings, that still had nobles, monarchs, these were a lot of the people in the upper classes of society had these friends in other countries, and a lot of times they were even related to them. So Louis the 16th is on the sidelines, kind of behind the scenes, going, hey, if like you guys want to come over and take over France and put me back on the throne, I would really much appreciate that. So and with the Constitution, he decides now is a pretty good time to try to leave France, so he's no longer kind of kept under house arrest like he had been. So he tries to escape the country. However, it fails at the border and he is sent back. And the importance of him trying to escape was the fact that many people who had even been in favor of having a monarch, their hopes were kind of dashed with this. The fact that he had tried to turn tail and leave made many people not really believe in having a monarch anymore. So what to do with the king? Remember, we can have a constitutional monarchy, or we can have a republic. That's kind of our options. So, constitutional monarchy, I was talking about this earlier, it's led by a monarch with the constitution to limit their powers and have representatives in a parliament. This is what the UK has. Or a republic, ruled by representatives and no king. Well, this is what the United States of America has. So here are the options that we have to do with the king, while now he's kind of in jail for the moment. Not really jail, but house arrest. So we're keeping an eye on him. So here's our options to do with the king. We can either keep him as a constitutional monarch, we can exile him and make it so he can never come back, or we can execute him. So you can see you have kind of the most generous options and then the harshest option, which is straight up execution. So what is going to be done with the king? Well, there's 3 different factions of the Legislative Assembly that have kind of come into being. We have the first group, the conservatives. They're the ones who want to keep the monarchy, they want the king to have limited authority, and they felt like the revolution had gone far enough. Then we also have the second group, the radicals, also known as the Jacobins. They wanted to get rid of the king and set up a republic. We also have the moderates, the third group. They have really no extreme views. They kind of go with either the conservatives or the radicals, just depending on the issue that comes up in the assembly. So this is also where we get the terms left and right today, like being on the political right versus the political left. It actually comes from these factions of the Legislative Assembly. The conservatives ended up sitting on the right side of the meeting hall, and the radicals had sat on the left side. So this is where we get a left-wing politician versus a right-wing politician. All those terms actually come from this point in the French Revolution. So if you ever wondered why it's called left and right, well, there you go. Going to war. Okay, this is really what makes the French Revolution so complicated. It's just in the middle of this big controversy and getting rid of the king and all that, they decided to just have a war in the middle of it. Why is that? So the French decided that they needed to spread the ideas of the revolution. I put idea there, I should put ideas plural. The French, they felt the call to spread the ideas of the revolution to other countries. But what was the response by the monarchs of other countries in Europe? Well, they combined to counter the French. They didn't want revolutions in their countries. So basically, keep your revolution and all your crazy ideas. We like having the monarchy that we have. We don't want you to bring in your radical notions into our countries, and we don't want our peasant populations rebelling against us. So the Legislative Assembly actually votes to go to war with Austria in 1792. When the invading army shows up outside Paris, because they decide to go to war, it's actually a coalition army between Austria and Prussia, which will end up becoming one of the centers of Germany later. So this combined army comes into France. And, as soon as the people in Paris learn that there is an invading army coming, of course, there's another huge panic. So things are just constantly in flux. People are super scared. They don't know what to do. The invading army shows up outside Paris. More chaos erupts. And the Jacobins, the most radical, the ones who were against the king, the ones who were against, having any sort of monarchy at all, who wanted to really spread the ideas of the revolution, they end up taking power and taking control in this moment of chaos. So the Jacobins accused the king of conspiring with the Austrians to take over the country. He kind of did, but it was one of those things to where they didn't really have 100% proof, but they accused him of doing that. They suspended the monarchy and rewrote the constitution, creating what is known as the National Convention. That's going to be the new power in France, is going to be the National Convention from this point on. The invasion that was so pressing is barely held off. They have some troops come in and actually stop the army from invading Paris. And now what's going to end up happening is that the radicals are now in complete control of France. So what is that going to lead to? Well, I have the picture right there. This is going to lead to the execution of the king and to the Queen Marie Antoinette. And then we're going to have what is known as the Reign of Terror. So next time when you join, we're going to show how a lot of these high-minded ideals about, fraternity and equality and liberty end up getting twisted into what is known as the Reign of Terror. And there's a lot of really interesting points that end up happening there. So we're going to enter into the craziest phase of the French Revolution next time. So I hope you join me for that. Thank you for watching, everyone. Bye-bye.